A quiet room inside the Ukrainian Presidential Administration building in Kyiv. Staff are already at their desks. Coffee is going cold. On the screens, a live drone feed from Donetsk Oblast, 480 kilometers to the southeast. The drone is hovering at 1,200 meters. Below it, scattered across a tree line near the village of Rodinska, roughly 11 kilometers north of Mirnohrad, are the remnants of a Russian assault column. 12 vehicles, 4 of them burning. And somewhere inside that building in Kyiv, a senior Ukrainian intelligence officer just filed a report that lands on President Volodymyr Zelensky's desk by 7 a.m. That report contains a number, a single number that Zelensky has been waiting 4 years to see. We'll get to that number, but first, you need to understand what is actually happening on this front line right now. Because the picture that is emerging this week is unlike anything we have seen since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. And there is a third person in that room in Kyiv, someone whose presence nobody in Moscow expected. We will get to them too. Here is what nobody is telling you in the headlines. Russia is not just losing battles this week. Russia is losing the mathematics of this war. And when a military operation loses its mathematics, its ability to put more soldiers in the field than it is taking out, that is not a setback. That is a structural collapse in slow motion. And the data we now have, published independently by Russian opposition outlets Meduza and Mediazona in collaboration with BBC Russian on May 9th of this year, confirms it in black and white. At least 352,000 Russian soldiers have been killed since February 24th, 2022. Not wounded, not missing, killed. That figure comes from Russia's own probate registry, court records, and civil death registrations, sources that the Kremlin cannot simply erase. Of those 352,000, approximately 261,000 have official death certificates issued by Russian civil registry offices. The other 90,000 were declared dead by Russian court orders. Soldiers listed as missing in action for so long that their own families filed legal cases to have them declared legally deceased. To put that in perspective, Russia has lost more soldiers killed in this war than the United States lost in World War I and the entire Vietnam War combined. Signal number one that something has fundamentally broken inside the Russian military machine. But here's the catch. And this is the first pivot you need to pay attention to. The question is not just how many are dead. The question is whether Russia can replace them. And this is where the real disaster begins. In April of this year, a Ukrainian intelligence analyst named Colonel Oksana Horyainova delivered a briefing that sent shockwaves through NATO capitals. Her central finding: in March 2026, for the first time since the invasion began, Russia lost more soldiers than it was able to recruit in a single month. In March alone, Russian forces suffered 35,351 killed and seriously wounded, a single-month record. Meanwhile, Russia's recruitment apparatus, despite dangling signing bonuses that in some Siberian and Ural regions now reach the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars, managed to recruit only approximately 940 soldiers per day, versus the Kremlin's internal target of 1,100 to 1,150 per day. Total first quarter recruitment, approximately 70,000 to 80,000 soldiers. Total first quarter losses, 89,000 to 90,000 killed and seriously wounded. The deficit is running at roughly 10 to 15% per month, and the trajectory is pointing in only one direction. What does that mean on the ground? It means that when Russian assault units punch forward toward Pokrovsk, the the critical Ukrainian logistics hub in western Donetsk Oblast that serves the entire Eastern Front, they are doing so with battalions that are not being fully replenished. Ukrainian drone operators, coordinating through the 422nd Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment and dozens of similar units, are documenting this in real time. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has confirmed that approximately 96% of all Russian casualties in this period are being inflicted by drones. Not artillery, not missiles. Drones. FPV drones that cost less than $500 apiece are killing and wounding Russian soldiers who are worth, in the Kremlin's own recruitment calculus, signing bonuses of $15,000 to $20,000 each. The arithmetic of this war has flipped, and the Kremlin's own generals know it. Now, the territorial picture. This is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. Analysis published by Russia Matters using Institute for the Study of War data covers the 4-week period from April 14th to May 12th, 2026. In that period, Russian forces experienced a net loss of 45 square miles of Ukrainian territory. That is roughly twice the size of Manhattan Island, gone from Russian control in 28 days. Compare that to the previous 4-week window from March 17th to April 14th, when Russian forces lost only a single square mile. Something shifted dramatically in mid-April. The week of May 5th to 12th alone saw Russia lose 12 square miles, following a 21 square mile loss in the prior week. The trend line is accelerating, not flattening. Now, to be precise, Russia still controls a substantial portion of eastern and southern Ukraine. Over the full year from May 2025 to May 2026, Russia netted approximately 1,669 square miles of Ukrainian territory overall, roughly the size of Rhode Island. But the rate of gain has collapsed, and in the most recent month, it has reversed entirely. Russia launched over 8,000 drones in April 2026, the highest monthly drone total since the invasion began, and it still lost ground. That is the definition of a failing offensive. Here's what nobody is telling you about why this is happening. The drone war has crossed a threshold. In March 2026, Ukraine carried out more drone strikes than Russia did. That had never happened before in 4+ years of war. Ukraine's Middle Strike Drone Program, UAVS, capable of hitting targets 200 to 300 kilometers inside Russian-controlled territory, is now being deployed at scale. Ukrainian drone strikes in March alone hit 274 air defense systems. Think about what that means. Every S-300 system, every Pantsir, every radar array that Ukraine destroys reduces Russia's ability to protect its own supply lines, its own command posts, its own logistics hubs. And it compounds. Because once air defense coverage has gaps, Ukraine's longer-range ATACMS and Storm Shadow systems can probe deeper. Ukrainian drone operators flew more than 1,500 kilometers in March to hit oil refineries and military facilities. That is not a tactical operation. That is a strategic air campaign being waged by a country that does not have a traditional Air Force advantage. And here is where the geopolitical domino effect begins. In April, Ukrainian drones struck the Tuapse oil terminal on Russia's Black Sea coast, a facility that processes and exports Russian crude through the port of Tuapse in Krasnodar Krai. The terminal has been burning since April 16th. Fire crews are still on site. Benzene and xylene readings in surrounding residential areas of Tuapse exceeded safe limits. 2 workers were killed in the first wave of strikes, 1 in the second. The port infrastructure, tanks, pipelines, loading arms, is severely damaged. Russia exports approximately 3 million barrels of crude oil per day. Every refinery and terminal that Ukraine takes offline shrinks the revenue stream that funds the war. Shrinking revenue means less money for those $20,000 signing bonuses. Less money for signing bonuses means fewer recruits. Fewer recruits means thinner front lines. Thinner front lines means more Ukrainian drone strikes. The loop is closing. And Moscow's generals are feeling it in every morning briefing. But here is the catch, pivot number 2. And this is where the story gets genuinely dangerous. There is a faction inside the Kremlin that has convinced Vladimir Putin of something very different. The Financial Times, citing 2 separate sources in direct contact with Putin, reported in early May that Russia's top military commanders have persuaded Putin that his forces could seize the entirety of the Donbass region, all of it, by this autumn. The logic they are presenting to Putin is this. Yes, losses are high, but territorial momentum in certain sectors continues. Yes, recruitment is slowing, but strategic reserves have not yet been fully committed. And yes, Ukraine is inflicting extraordinary drone casualties, but Russian industrial output is still producing Shahed variants and Iskander-M ballistic missiles at a pace that Western analysts estimate at 300 to 400 cruise missiles and over 1,000 drones per month. The hardliners around Putin, and here we need to be specific, include figures connected to Russia's Southern Military District Command, which oversees operations in Zaporizhia, Kherson, and southern Donetsk. These are the voices urging escalation, not negotiation. And as long as those voices have Putin's ear in his private sessions at Novo-Ogadiovo residence, the war continues. This is the tension at the heart of everything happening right now in the diplomatic corridors. Because simultaneously, peace talks are technically underway, or at least the scaffolding of them is still standing. Here is the current state of the diplomatic picture, and you need to follow the movement of messages very carefully. On May 8th, President Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire covering May 9th, 10th, and 11th, the Victory Day period, after calling both Zelensky and Putin. Both sides nominally agreed. By May 9th, Ukraine's general staff reported 51 combat engagements after the ceasefire went into effect. Russia's defense ministry accused Ukraine of 8,970 ceasefire violations, including 1,173 artillery and MLRS strikes and 7,151 drone strikes. Ukraine said Russian drones hit residential infrastructure in Kharkiv and Kherson oblasts during the ceasefire period. Each side is accusing the other. The ceasefire was, in practical terms, a fiction with 2 signatures on it. What it was, in reality, was an opportunity, exploited by Russia's 90th Tank Division, which redeployed from the Oleksandrivka and Novopavlivka directions toward the Pokrovsk axis during the reduced operational tempo. The Institute for the Study of War assessed this directly. Russian forces have repeatedly used ceasefire windows to regroup, rotate units, and fortify positions in areas where Ukrainian drone activity had previously prevented them from doing so. Now here is where the third person in that Kiev room becomes relevant. Ukraine's chief negotiator, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, traveled to Miami in mid-May for a series of meetings with American representatives as the peace process stalled. That meeting in Miami was not on any public schedule for the first 48 hours. It was leaked to Ukrainian journalists via Telegram, the primary medium through which real-time intelligence about this conflict flows publicly. The content of what was discussed in Miami is not confirmed. But the framing around those talks tells you everything. Zelensky has presented a 20-point peace framework to the United States. Ukraine accepted Trump's unconditional 30-day ceasefire proposal back in March of this year, the one Russia rejected. The record now shows that Ukraine has accepted every ceasefire proposal on the table since March 2025. Russia has rejected all of them. And yet, Trump, according to reporting by Axios, was described by European allies on a recent multilateral call as being relatively content with what Putin told him, even as the Kremlin's position has not fundamentally shifted. There are sources in the room. They say that Trump appears to be operating from a frame that what Putin is saying privately represents progress, when the observable reality on the ground is the opposite. Here's what that means if you draw the line forward. If peace talks continue to stall, which is the current trajectory as of this morning, Wednesday, May 20th, and Russia continues bleeding at the current rate of approximately 35,000 to 40,000 irreversible casualties per month, the Ukrainian military's own strategic calculus says that it's somewhere between 50,000 and 55,000 casualties per month. Russia's recruitment engine can no longer fill the gap. At that point, Moscow faces a binary choice: escalate with tools it has been holding in reserve, including a potential larger mobilization wave that would be politically catastrophic domestically, or accept a negotiated outcome from a position of genuine military disadvantage for the first time in this war. The Ukrainian goal, stated publicly by President Zelensky in January 2026, is to push Russian monthly losses to exactly 50,000. The current rate is already clearing 35,000. Ukraine is 70% of the way to that target. And the drone production partnerships Ukraine signed with European allies and a leading American defense contractor earlier this year, deals for hundreds of thousands of additional drones, are only beginning to come online. But here is what the hardliners in Moscow are betting on. And this is where the geopolitical domino effect runs in the other direction. Russia still controls roughly 1/5 of Ukraine's territory. The occupied oblasts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea represent approximately 20% of Ukraine's pre-war landmass. Russia's grip on those territories, particularly Crimea and the land bridge connecting it to Russia, remains substantial. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, though diminished by Ukrainian Neptune and drone boat strikes, continues to complicate Ukraine's southern posture. And Russia's energy infrastructure, despite Ukrainian deep strikes, is still generating the revenue that funds the war. Brent crude is currently trading above $80 a barrel, partly because global instability, including the separate Iran crisis that has consumed significant American diplomatic bandwidth since late February, has kept energy prices elevated. Higher oil prices mean more rubles flowing into Moscow's war budget. If oil were to drop to $60, Russia's fiscal position changes dramatically. But at current prices, the Kremlin has cushion. There is something else happening in this war that Western analysts have only recently begun to discuss openly. The composition of Russia's casualties has shifted. According to Mediazona's breakdown of the 352,000 confirmed Russian dead, approximately 25,900 were volunteers, 16,500 were recruited prisoners, convicts offered freedom in exchange for frontline service, and 11,900 were mobilized soldiers. This tells you that Russia has already cycled through the most willing segments of its available fighting age population. The pool of volunteers is drying up. The prisoner pipeline, which produced extraordinary results in 2023 and 2024 under the old Wagner PMC model, is now running through the Defense Ministry, and it is producing soldiers with shorter training windows, lower discipline, and higher casualty rates. Ukrainian OSINT community members tracking Russian telegram channels used by soldiers' families have noted increasing posts this spring from wives, mothers, and sisters asking why military contract payments have been cut in certain regions. Some Russian regional governments have quietly reduced enlistment bonuses to offset budget deficits. Russia's combined regional budget deficit is currently estimated at approximately $9 billion. These are the signals of a system under internal strain, a system that publicly projects confidence while privately counting a deficit it cannot explain away. What does this mean for the frontline picture right now, today, on Wednesday, May 20th? In the Pokrovsk direction, the most attritionally intense axis of the entire war, Russian forces are still pressing. The 90th Tank Division has established new command posts in Mirnovrad, east of Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of the Air Assault Forces is monitoring their movements and coordinating defensive drone operations. Pokrovsk itself, a critical rail and road logistics hub for Ukraine's entire Donetsk sector, has not fallen. Russian forces are assessed to be within approximately 10 kilometers of its outskirts, but the rate of advance toward it has slowed. Every kilometer Russia advances now costs 316 Russian casualties per square kilometer captured, compared to 120 casualties per square kilometer last year, a 163% increase in the human cost of territorial gain. In the Lyman and Kupiansk directions further north, the picture is more static. Ukrainian drone coverage has been sufficient to prevent Russian forces from fortifying new positions in those sectors. The Zaporizhia axis, where Russian forces have long harbored ambitions of driving northwest to split Ukraine's defensive lines and threaten the industrial city of Zaporizhia itself, has shown no meaningful Russian advance. The city of Zaporizhia, despite persistent missile targeting, remains under Ukrainian control. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, currently under Russian occupation, continues to operate at low capacity and remains a source of international alarm. The IAEA has personnel on site, but their ability to monitor independently is constrained. Any significant escalation in that region risks triggering a nuclear safety incident of a scale that would fundamentally alter the political calculus in Brussels, Berlin, and Washington simultaneously. Here is the scenario nobody wants to say out loud. If Russian forces were to suffer a major battlefield reversal, not just a slow territorial bleed, but an actual collapse of a significant frontline segment, the pressure on Putin from the hardliner faction to respond with escalatory means would intensify sharply. Russia still possesses tactical nuclear weapons. Its doctrine permits their use in a scenario where Russia's territorial integrity, which it has legally claimed now extends to the 4 annexed Ukrainian oblasts, is under existential threat. A Ukrainian breakthrough toward Melitopol, for instance, which would cut the land bridge to Crimea, would trigger that threat calculus. This is why, despite Ukraine's current momentum, Zelensky's advisors are careful about framing. The goal is attrition, not breakthrough. The goal is to make the cost of continuation so high that Moscow chooses the table over the trench. That is a precise and deliberate strategic calculation, not timidity. That conversation is politically explosive. It risks direct NATO-Russia confrontation. But it is happening. And the outcome of the stalled Miami talks between Umerov and American representatives will shape whether Washington moves in that direction or pulls back. Here is the chain reaction you need to map. If the peace talks in their current form fully collapse, and the indicators as of this morning suggest they are on life support, the pressure on European governments to expand weapons authorization will intensify. A European decision to lift strike restrictions draws an immediate Kremlin response, likely a new wave of infrastructure strikes on Ukraine at a scale designed to demonstrate that escalation has costs. Russia launched over 273 drones in a single overnight strike in late March, targeting Odessa, Kryvyi Rih, and Poltava. Ukraine's Air Force shot down 252 of them. But the ones that got through hit port facilities, energy infrastructure, and residential areas. Ukraine's available power generation capacity has already fallen from 33.7 gigawatts at the start of the invasion to approximately 14 gigawatts today. Ukrainian energy provider DTEK's CEO stated in late January that Ukraine has lost approximately 70% of its generation capacity. Civilians in parts of Ukraine receive only 3 to 4 hours of electricity per day. An escalatory Russian strike campaign aimed at the remaining 14 gigawatts would be catastrophic for civilian life and for Ukraine's industrial war economy. That is the leverage Russia still holds. Not the front line, where it is bleeding at record rates, not diplomacy, where it has been positioned as the obstructionist by every Western capital, but the ability to strike civilian infrastructure at a scale that tests the endurance of both the Ukrainian population and the willingness of European publics to sustain support. That is Putin's remaining card. And it is why the next 24 to 72 hours matter more than almost any comparable window in recent months. There is a meeting that has not been publicly confirmed, but has been referenced in background conversations by 3 separate diplomatic sources. It involves a potential direct communication channel between the Trump administration's special envoy and a Kremlin-adjacent intermediary. Not Lavrov, not Peskov, but a figure closer to the security apparatus. The purpose of that channel, if it exists and if it is active, is to test whether there is any formula, any arrangement on territorial status, on security guarantees, on a phased freeze, that both sides could accept without either leader losing the domestic framing battle. That test has been running for weeks. The answer has not come back yet. And yet, peace talks are stalled. The 3-day ceasefire collapsed within hours. Russia's hardliners have convinced Putin that the Donbass can still be seized this autumn. A potential breakthrough diplomatic channel exists, but has not yet produced a result. The next move belongs to Moscow, and Moscow has not shown its hand. This comes down to a binary. In the next 24 to 72 hours, the signal from the Kremlin will be either a substantive response through the back channel, something that moves the needle toward negotiation, or another round of mass drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. There is no middle ground left. Either Russia accepts that the mathematics of this war have turned against it and begins the process of finding an exit, or it doubles down on the one instrument it still wields with devastating effect: the capacity to darken Ukrainian cities, freeze Ukrainian homes, and test whether the will of a battered civilian population can outlast the will of a regime that has already buried 352,000 of its own sons. That is not speculation. That is what the numbers say. That is what the Frontline maps show. And that is what officials who have read the classified briefings are saying in private. The clock is ticking. The next move belongs to Moscow. And Kyiv is watching every screen.